Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to this week's episode of Can I Kick It FC, brought to you by the wonderful people at 2 Cents FC. Make sure you go check them out. You got a lengthy podcast. You got us. You got For the Culture. You got Shea Butter FC, and of course, 2 Cents FC and Unhinged with Kyle McCullough. I'm your host, as always, Elliot Barr, and is joining me is a guy that has some brilliant research on not only of how racism is exploited in the game of soccer, also how that's deep rooted in Italy. I'm going too far into it right now. We're going to talk more about it in the podcast, but let me go ahead and introduce my guest, Mr. Jamar Harp. How are you doing, sir?
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. No problem at all. It's a pleasure. Um, I was on your show last week where we talked about some of these same issues we're going to talk about now, but it was kind of interesting how we kind of linked up and kind of got each other's attention about working with each other on this.
Definitely. I think, with social media, it has its positives and its negatives. And if it's used the right way, there's a lot of positives. And just as Elliot just stated, through positive research and, following threads, I was able to find him and not only, but a large other contingent of Black soccer followers as well. So it was, like I said, using things the right way.
Yeah.
So
How
really
they were intended to be used.
exactly.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it was so great. Because I think one of the points that we talked about on your show was about the black diaspora of just soccer supporters. How none of us are all the same, but we're all kind of collectively coming together and wanting to be one and wanting to, find a place where we can be our authentic selves. And I think that was one of the most important things I had that conversation. But let's go ahead and let's dive into this, man, because I have a lot of questions to ask you on this paper that you wrote.
No
Um,
problem.
but let's go ahead. I want to ask you this question, man. How did you get involved with soccer? Like, how did you come to love the sport and watch the sport?
Well, it started, I would say, I had, watched it a little bit growing up. I remember I was seeing, I didn't really like it when I watched it over here, but I saw Romario and Bebeto play, and I was like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. And then when I was in undergrad in the School of Business, we had to do a report on West African country and its GDP and different things. So I had picked Nigeria, and of course, when you look at infrastructure, you want to look at not only hospitals and schools, but entertainment infrastructure, which included soccer stadiums. So I had a little taste of it there, and then in my master's program, I had did another research topic that came up inconclusive using quantitative analysis. So kind of led me into soccer and my next educational stop. And that's where I, got into it historically. But, I started to like it. I said at an early age, I didn't really like American soccer, but, Brazil and some of the other, African teams because of, skill and tricks they will put on a pitch. That's what I started liking, that style of play.
Yeah. So it seems as if like the way how you kind of found the soccer was more of that historical aspect of it and seeing it from these Afro-centric cultures such as Brazil, like you presented. Um, I know in your paper you were talking about the one paper that I read, the African origins of soccer, and there was one part you were talking about how a lot of what we do now in our culture, basketball wise, can always be linked to that of African soccer with the tricks, the skills, and that's how people naturally love to the game. Can you just talk about that passage right there?
Okay, so basically, the research he's referring to, um, my research topic was the exclusion of Africans in United States soccer. So to look at that, I went back to the African origins, and what I found out is when the Catholic Church was forming up in its first two, constituents, Spain and Portugal. So they will fight. The church split the world in half. It's called the Papal Bull of Demarcation, and it's happening around 1492. And the Portuguese began to colonize the west coast of Africa. You still see the remnants of the day with names such as Lagos in Nigeria, which is a Portuguese name. The Elamina Castle in Ghana, which is another Portuguese name. And they took citizens, in particularly from Angola to Brazil, who then brought with them a lot of elements of their culture, including capoeira and this distinct free play style of soccer that you see remnants of, and pick up football if you're just playing in the street and you throw the ball back and you got to shake everybody, or basketball with the four corners and fast break offense. So it's basically a cultural expression of free play that shows up in multiple sports, and that's where it essentially comes from. These West Coast Africans do mainly centered in Angola.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that part of your paper interesting, of how in these different cultures, in these different cultures than ours, about how um, just how their culture would kind of bleed into the sport, about how they would use these tricks and skills, but it wasn't like they were trying to show someone up. It was almost like a sign of respect,
Yeah,
kind of way, right?
definitely. Again, from growing up, if you look at the word leisure, when you break that down, the root of it is "licere" in Latin, to be free, and that's where free play comes from. So, in a cultural expression where you get the game and it's not rigid in rules such as this position has to only go in these areas, you get a more well-developed player. So, if you look at the NBA and the progression of the power forward or center position, now you see point forwards or point centers, guys that are 6'10", that dribble the ball up and down the court like guards and shoot like guards, but or the size of forwards. In the past, they would have just been limited to playing forwards, or in a quote unquote European regulated style where you only can do certain things based off of your body type.
Yeah, that seems. I know this is something we were talking about your show, and how that bleeds into kind of like American sports, not only soccer but also in football or basketball or baseball, about how the physical physique of a young kid is kind of almost more looked at than what the skills they have and what the attributes have. It's kind of like the thing like growing up about how if you're 6 foot, we're gonna put you on this offensive line and we're gonna make sure you're a pass blocker or something like that. Do you see in doing your research? Did you kind of see those same tendencies as well?
Yeah, and you also see it in culture. So, for example, if you look at let's say hockey, for example, which is again a byproduct of enslaved Africans who ran to Nova Scotia and started the Maritime Hockey League. But the current game now is different than the game they play in Europe, where in America it's more dump and chase. It goes with the quote unquote style of hard nose, be physical, instead of focusing on being athletic and creating moves. Where in other countries, their skating style, is much more wide open, and therefore they gain better success within the game when they come to America. If you look at the influx of Europeans that come to the game, they don't play the game like the Americans do. They play like more of an Afrocentric style, whereas they're skating and trying to get around people instead of a dump and chase physical style of play. They're accentuating skill.
Yeah. Oh man, it's kind of. I want to have a definitely a question, but I want to hang on that point for a second where you talked about skill. It's kind of seemed like that's always been a knock against people of color when it comes to certain sports, about how we don't have the necessary skill set to succeed. I almost equated to like how during the 80s and 90s, the reason why we didn't have any black quarterbacks, some owners and NFL writers will tell you, is because they didn't have the necessary skill set, which is coded in racism. What were your thoughts about seeing that same kind of language pop up in your research of why Africans were kind of excluded or not looked at favorably within the sports?
Well, it went beyond skill set. In the research, you find that it's an attack on one's mental state, stating that they have skill, but they don't have the comprehension to maintain or follow instruction or rules, so therefore they can't play certain positions. There's a theoretical concept called stacking. So if you look at European football throughout its history, the African players you did see or players of African descent might be along the outsides, wingers, left backs, very few center backs or midfielders, the quote unquote thinking positions. And that same thing resonates in American sports as well, too, where you saw with the quarterback, middle linebacker, which is changing now in American football, but you see these same patterns resonate.
Yeah. So, as a fellow historian and researcher like you, how long did it take you to get frustrated by all this research that you were seeing? Like, why?
Man, well, the funny thing about research is once you learn it, it's very hard to teach people about it because oftentimes it deconstructs a lot of people's foundations, especially in our community, which is rooted off of a religion that we learned during our enslavement. So a lot of things with research can be tricky. You either have to present it in a different manner or not present it at all. But it was just very shocking just to find out all these things were happening, and it was kind of related around sport. If you look at capoeira not being allowed to play the drum because they would get scared thinking, oh, something's going to happen when they're playing the drum. So we're going to outlaw this, even though it was being played in, ceremonial fashion and being used to communicate. So they were right, but just being scared of this and outlawing it, as well as other aspects of sport in this time is, just amazing. So it kind of shows you how sport is interrelated with history in the grand scheme.
That is very true. And some people would like to forget, or you've seen it so much in history, like how people like to forget about certain issues when it comes to sports and be like, oh, it doesn't matter about when it comes like things such as like sports washing and things like that. You're kind of seeing that same case now with the Qatar World Cup and how, or Russia, for instance, about how they're just using sports as a way to kind of whitewash away the issues that are going on in those countries and things like that.
Mhm.
And America is one of the main proponents of using sports washing as well. I want to pivot real quick back to your paper, and I want to pick up the 2 points that really caught my interest when I was reading it. Um, the social constructs and the racial constructs. Can you just elaborate on those 2 points?
Okay, so when you look at soccer and the social constructs, if we look at a present time and, in America, through marketing, print, social media, it's viewed as an elitist or middle class sport where the rest of the world is played by people in the barrio or, the hood, the slums. It's seen like, basketball and football in every other country in the world, except this one is the top way out athletically. When you look at the social constructs that you face within the game, especially with national soccer, if you look at the European teams now, you'll see Portugal, the Netherlands, pretty much all the European countries that had colonies will have, players of African descent playing for them or gaining citizenship to help their soccer team better. So you have nationalism, the hegemony of these different European countries being at question, and also the cultural awareness of the Africans that are being used in this process when they can be playing for their home country. France, who won the World Cup, not this past cycle, but 2 cycles ago, started 8 out of the 11 positions were individuals of African descent. Some were born in Africa and gained, French citizenship. They have a large block of countries in Western Africa that are former colonies that they currently, I don't know if you can call it doing business, but there's a arrangement set together that favor the French. Let's just say that. So there's a lot of people gaining citizenship and going back and forth and playing for Ivory Coast or France or Senegal, etc. So there's a lot of different concepts that go in this. So it's a larger can of worms than I anticipated. But once I got into it, it was very interesting. It kind of shows you how different countries fight the game, national power through a game.
Yeah. I kind of want to dive into that can of worms with you, my man, because on our show we did an episode featuring the 2018 France national team, and we found a lot of relationships and ties to Africa. About how I think it was like 3/4 of this team could have
Mm.
played for an African country at some
Yeah.
point in their career, and what me and Shinner kind of came up with was the reason why: money and just kind of social status. Like a player like such as Kylian Mbappe could have played for Cameroon or Algeria, but he plays in France, probably lived in France his entire life, and not saying like he doesn't feel connected to either one of those two countries, but financially for him, it makes more sense for him to be a French national team player than it does to be Cameroonian or Algerian. Did you kind of see those kind of trends as well while researching that point about how these European nations are kind of targeting and looking for African players with the same heritage?
Definitely. Again, this is the world's biggest sport. We don't quite realize that in the United States, but in these European countries, it's a vie for to be number one and be the best nation. So a lot of them are against the citizens' will or taking in nationals through that have ties through colonialism. So when you look at the French national team, you had individuals on there not only from Cameroon, Algeria, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Niger, Congo, lots of different regions. And what happens is if you look at politics, and a lot of these African countries getting their citizenship or statehood coming out of colonialism excuse me, in the 1950s and 60s. These individuals playing soccer right now are technically first generation citizens without the rule of Europeans in their country. So due to different monetary scales, that due to taxes, a lot of these countries said, okay, you want your freedom, so we're going to sue you. That's France is known for that. So the countries that declared freedom, they had to pay millions back to France and give them, free stuff in trade. So it weakens them. So therefore, you have citizens that want to move to, Paris and the outskirts, who then end up playing for the French national team instead of their African country. The difference you see in Europe versus the United States is the French citizens don't really want them there. They make it known that they're not French citizens. They have different characters in Europe. There's one that's like blackface and blacktail in Denmark, and they have little cartoons. They actually call the projects there the Lost World. So a lot of the individuals of African descent live there. They still speak their indigenous African languages, even though they're in Paris, and they do this on a national team as well. So there's always a connection to their homeland. They're just using it for economic purposes.
Yeah, I kind of get that sense about it as well, and I think it was the famous point that Zinedine Zidane made, and also Mesut Ozil, about if I win, I'm with this country. This country loves me. But the moment we lose, I'm looked at as an immigrant, or I'm looked lesser than. Can you just talk to the point about kind of just not shifting from financially, but kind of just focus on looking at the point of these players? They know they're going to get these reactions from some supporters, not all, but some supporters were in their nation. Why did he still choose to make the decision? Because it just seems simple. Go to where you're wanted, not where you're needed. But why did they make the decision to go play for these bigger name nations?
Well, a lot of these guys are in their 20s making over $20 million a year.
Yeah.
And they come from countries where minimum wage is $2 a day. something like that. If you look at, there's the neighborhood in Ghana where all the professional soccer players live at. They have their own neighborhood, and they all like retire there. Asamoah Gyan, some of the IU brothers live there. It's a lot of different, stars that either play for the Black Stars or in Europe, have homes there. Again, it's all monetary. Why do the NFL players play in the United States for the rules that they have to be imposed under?
Yeah, no, that's very true. It's very true. Um, Another point that I saw that really stuck out to me, and I guess this is under the racial construct of your article, just how can I phrase this? Just knowing what some of these players go through, how do they kind of balance that with the mental aspect of it? Kind of like the racial constraints on it, because you're not in some situations you're not able to fully show who you are or your full culture. How do they deal with that on the mental side of it?
Well, a lot of the players, again, now isolate themselves within their culture, especially in London. You'll see different enclaves. If you look at South London, there's a lot of enclaves of West African and Caribbean. So you can go there, do different things like that. Stay out of what we call like an uptown or downtown setting,
Yeah.
north of the river where the quote unquote wanksters party at. Just doing different things like that, isolating yourself. A lot of these players in breaks, they'll leave where they're at and go back home. Time with their national teams, and then if it gets too bad, oftentimes you'll see people transferring, saying, a lot of people like to play in the Premier League because that's the least racist of all the professional leagues.
Okay. Um, I, I
Say
think
the
that,
least, to
yeah,
say.
the least. I don't think that's it's still. I want to actually this last part in this article. We could go switch to the other one. Just you ended the article talking about some of the predatory tactics that clubs would use on players about kind of forcing them to stay within this area of, saying like, hey, you got to be here, or we won't pay you full amount, or kind of being predatory in a way of how they get them to join their club in the first part. Can you just explain that matter, how that
All
happens?
right, so a lot of these European teams, they operate as a network. So you'll see the top flight team, whether that's the Premier League, Serie A, etc. What you won't see is their club teams within that system. Their youth teams, which will be under 18, under 21, etc., under 15. So you're matriculating youth through this, and the goal is to bring someone through your youth system, so you're under sevens all the way up to your top flight team. That's the goal of every team, to develop your own players, because it's cheaper. When you look at buying players, it's cheaper or any product. If I was making bread, it'd be cheaper to make it myself than outsource it. So it's cheaper to grow your own players per se. So in this, it's always a push to get the academy, and that's what people don't see. So you'll see street agents in mainly in Africa, from all these top leagues, inviting players, having road tryouts. Some of these agents will hold a tryout and say the top player made it, and it really wasn't a tryout. They just had money to pay for one player to go to London. Then they get there and they're living in a flat or hostel with whole bunch of other people to try out for another team in London and go through that. So there's a lot of deceit and corruption in this, because again, if you're due to the taxes and other sanctions that the European countries put on these nations that declare their independence, it's hard for them to get into the green, even though they've been independent since the 60s or 70s. And a lot of people don't realize that. So due to the low wages, people always want to move to where you can make more money And henceforth they go to these leagues, and some of them make it big and bring their whole families up because this is guaranteed money like baseball and basketball. So when you sign for $80 million and you get some of your transfer fee, you really get $80 million for that year. So that changes, that's generational wealth. So the people that can get this, it changes not only them but their families and country. So it's a lot of people that fight for it. Oftentimes, many are left in these hostels and they don't go back home due to guilt and shame. So they end up in London, and then some lead to a life of crime and just a downward spiral. But it's all started due to these predatory tactics on basically middle school age young men to get them in these youth systems in Europe.
Yeah. No, not saying it's the same, but it definitely reminds me of how I want to say predatory AAU sports are, but almost as how it's kind of we're streamlining everything to be like, hey, if you want to make it something, you got to do this, you got to do it this way, and it doesn't allow the child to have fun with sports anymore. It's kind of like if you want to be that elite next level, you gotta be streamlined into this manner. So definitely with that. But we're gonna pivot again to your next article, and this one was really, really interesting. I think this is the one that I think we talked about for 30 minutes on your show about racism in Italy and how that influences soccer and other things. For those that have not read it, can you just give them a quick synopsis of what this paper was about?
So basically, this is another one of my research interests in graduate school. Mario Balotelli, he's a volatile figure that's been known throughout the soccer world for having different clashes. What people don't understand is he was a teenager, and when you look at Italy, it's one of those countries that wants to be totally homogenous. If you look at the conflict they had with Sicilians that had black blood in them, clearly demonstrates that anyone that is not, 100% Italian and what they deem, even though you lived there, the island of Sicily was part of Italy. They were picked on because they had blood other than European. So that still holds true to today. And even though they get a lot of African immigrants due to Sicily's close proximity to Northern Africa, and those immigrants moving out throughout the country of Italy, its soccer team, the Azzurri, and its supporters are wanting to be, again, homogenous, and they have declined African nationalism in its club teams as well. So this is a teenager who was getting threatened by grown men, people throwing objects at him, monkey noises, being called racial epithets, all types of names, and he was just trying to defend himself. But in public, it looks like it's a professional soccer player gone mad, but he's playing in this environment because he grew up in Italy. He was adopted and grew up in Italy. So he lived there his whole life. He spoke Italian, but he never was accepted. So he's playing in Serie A, which is Italian professional soccer. And these people were letting him know this every game by chanting at him and throwing things. And so again, it's a teenager defending himself against grown men.
Yeah, I think that was one of the more interesting things that we found on our show about Mario Balotelli, about just how I guess the best way you can summarize it was what we found out was that he was a person that never felt accepted or loved where he was at. Case in point, like Manchester City, Inter, like he was loved for what he could do on the field, but off the field, it was kind of just like we're gonna keep you at an arm's distance. We're not gonna allow you to fully be immersed into what we do. And he did have some people that fully loved him and cared for him, such as Roberto Mancini, who was his manager in Manchester City. And I think Roberto was probably the person that he needed most in his life just because of like he was like a father figure to him. He was there to help him out with his mistakes.
Well, if you look at even his comments recently saying after what happened at the European championships with England and the African players missing the PKs. And what happened to them saying, we should all go do a Super League in Africa. It's very similar to the genesis what's happening in, college football now with people choosing historically black colleges again versus the predominantly white institutions. So it's about realizing, who you are as a talent, who you're marketing yourself for, and who you're making money for, and deciding, do you want to make money for your community, your own, or do you want to be the best and play for somebody else's and not be accepted and make them rich?
And that was Mario or Roberto who made those comments?
That was Mario who made those comments about the Super League in Africa, about African players leaving Europe.
Yeah, that was another interesting thing. We kind of played the what if game on our show about Mario, about like what if he would have played for Ghana, because he would have been a part of that 2010 World Cup squad, and we're just like,
So so not only that, you can say what if both Boateng brothers was on that team?
Yeah,
you got Jerome and Prince. You have Mario Balotelli, Asamoah Gyan.
The Ayew brothers,
and this is a squad that already beat the United States. So with Balotelli, as well as both Boatengs, I think that's a World Cup final team, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like in a parallel universe, Ghana wins the World Cup. It is not relying on a penalty that gets, saved by Luis Suarez, Uruguay's squad. I want to actually this point about this. We don't have to talk about the whole passage, but I know there was a section in your paper focusing on Mario Balotelli. What were some of the more interesting things and concepts, or something that caught your attention that you never realized before when you were doing your research on Mario?
Well, what I never realized is again, from the outside looking in, you can see, why are you going through this, but then to realize that as a young child, if all you remember is, Italy, like you really can't leave Italy until you turn 18. But then when I turned 18, I signed a professional soccer contract. So now I'm still in Italy. I know I'm not quite accepted, but, I'm making, over $20 million. I'm making more a year than I am old, So now I'm still here, and just to see that final revelation that, because it was a while he wanted to play for the Italian national team, and every year he didn't get picked. Why I'm not getting picked? Why I'm not getting picked? And now he realized he should have been playing for Ghana the whole time. So just to see that revelation, it's just like, again, the revelation that you're seeing now. When if you look at Jackson State and what they're doing, as well as other teams in the Southwestern Athletic Conference, as well as the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, and signing athletes that are spurning Division I, predominantly white institutions. There's a lot of people coming to the same recognition at the same time. So, I hope it continues. And again, if you're the top talent, it's just deciding who you're going to make rich, yourself or someone else.
Yeah, no, that's how it comes down to, That's why, me personally, I don't belabor athletes when they're like, I'm ready to go to the league to go make my money. Because for 3-4 years you've been here making money for the school, they're not paying you anything.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand it.
And who you make money for. If you're going to make it for an institution, as soon as football's over, they make it known that you're an outsider, or you're going to make it for a historically black college and university that before integration, that's where the top athletes went. So that's another decision you have to make as well.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, that is a very good point. I think another interesting point that you had in this paper was about media representation and about how the media not only represented Mario but also other Africans within the Italian system. Is the one thing that I saw that we were looking at Mario, how he was kind of, I equate him almost to T.O., and about how the media represented him is, anyone that has met T.O. will tell you that he's an amazing person. He give you the shirt off his back, really passionate. But how he was portrayed was almost in terms of, oh, he's this negative connotation. He's this cancer within this team. He's the reason why they're not doing well. He's too cocky. He's too this. And it's just weird, not weird, because we've seen it so many other times about how our white counterparts can have emotion and, have bouts of anger within the game, and it's okay, it's fine. But as a black person or a person of color does it, then it gets labeled as a temper tantrum or an attitude. Can you just talk further about how that media representation is in Italy when it comes to people of color?
Well, not only in Italy, but most sports that are played in westernized countries, including the United States, you
Mhm.
see elements of that, basically to try to keep that athlete restricted in his power. Um, if you look at the narrative that's constructed, you'll see it's constantly that the athlete is naturally gifted. He doesn't have to work out. He didn't have to work hard. He didn't have to practice to get these skills. Or the non-African athlete is a hard worker. He's a gym rat. He's a student of the game. He doesn't have any athletic ability at all, but he's smarter and he gets his prowess and his advantage by being, smarter. And this is portrayed throughout the media. When you look at Italy, for example, again, it's not like the United States where they don't want a melting pot. In Serie A, you do have African players as well as players from, lots of different countries, but they're not Italian citizens. He was an Italian citizen since birth. You're starting to see a lot of that in Italy now due to the immigration. Um, and they have some crazy immigration rules in Italy as well to deter people from being immigrants. So you're looking at all these different factors, and again, this country wants to be homogenous, so they're going to paint these athletes as monsters and vilify them. For example, Mario Balotelli was larger than some of the men he was competing against when he was 18 and 19 years of age. So if you look at a newspaper and you see King Kong with his face on it and the smaller players around him, without knowing the contextualized content of the team or soccer, you would think this is a grown man bullying, other men, but he's 18 or 19. And, most people couldn't even play in that environment. So
Yeah.
that basically is what resonates not only in Italy, but throughout Western Europe.
Yeah, Italy has a really poor track record of using monkeys to describe, black people or
Yeah.
ending racism. I remember, I think it might have been 2017 or 18, and they were trying to do this No to Racism campaign, and he put monkeys in the faces of the soccer balls.
Mm.
I'll tweet it out later today. But I remember the backlash from that, and the Italian director was like, "Oh, we're just trying to show unity with the black community."
Well, you remember that's the same. Do you remember the game when Samuel Eto'o picked up the ball and all the black players walked off the field?
Yeah, I
Due
remember that one.
to the monkey chants and the bananas being thrown. And Samuel Eto'o was on the opposing team. So look how bad that is when you got the black players on both teams saying, "We're with you. We all leaving.
Right.
And we're taking the ball with us."
Right. It's just so crazy to think that we still live in a time and era where we have to go to the extremes to get the bare minimum in return and showing people like, hey, like you cannot use monkey chance. I don't care how much of a big of an advantage it is or how you're trying to get in my head. There's other ways to get in my head without degrading me as a human being, as a person. Um, I want to also peel back the layer on this and kind of look at it from this way. You made the point about it, these countries kind of being homogenous within their cultures. Not so far in the soccer field because they want the best players. But then it makes me ask this question: if these countries are so rooted in, we want you to be over there, we don't want you to be part of us, you're lesser than us, then why do they try so hard then to have us embedded into their soccer teams? Why do they try so hard then to get us to be part of their teams where we're not accepted within the culture? Because you would think, like, if we're not part of the culture, if you don't want us to be sitting beside you in the restaurant, why do you want me playing beside you on the soccer field?
All right, so that answer can be answered in a multitude of ways. First, Soccer is a microcosm of these countries. There's a lot of people that aren't even soccer or football fans. All the time, these owners, if you look at England, for example, the owners might not even be from England. There's Americans that own teams. There's a group from Saudi Arabia that owns multiple teams. The Prince of Saudi Arabia actually, owns a team, Newcastle United. So the focus is built on building the best team, not nation building. Now, outside of that framework of playing, when these players may walk to the grocery store, do something that average day people do, that's when they experience the racism and realize, hey, I'm not wanted over here. Everybody's not a soccer fan. Everybody doesn't want different people in their nation having sex with the natives, taking the bloodline, as they would call it.
Yeah. That is insane, and some people really do think like that. Also, I found the picture. I'm gonna pull it up real quick so you can look at it. Um, but yeah, that just seemed like such a crazy point. Like me and you would see that and be like, you're going to the very extreme to think of this. But these, there's some people in some decision makers that really think this way. Like, oh, you're gonna take the blunt, like you're gonna ruin this. Like, yeah. Sorry, I'm not trying to catch a headache over that.
Hey man, it is real. It's real.
Yeah, it is. It is. Um, oh, the base of this paper, I know it was very focused on Mario Balotelli, Italy, but do you think this can be used for any a situation that we look at? Because for every Mario Balotelli, you have a Didier Drogba that went back to his homeland and ended wars there. Or in the case of we're saying now, like a Marcus Rashford and a Sacco up in England, and how the kind of abuse that they went through after the Euros. Do you think this article can kind of be used in different aspects of life within the diaspora?
Well, definitely. And I think the article, it just basically shows is that you have to nationalize your product for it to get respect. So the example I like to use is the Japanese baseball league. And you compare the Japanese baseball league to the Negro leagues. The Negro leagues had the best baseball players. They took maybe the 20th best player, Jackie Robinson, and used him to integrate into Major League Baseball. Since they let them take individual players, they lost control of their whole league, and all the black players turned into Major League Baseball. However, in Japan, they have rules saying if you're from Japan, you can't play anywhere else until you play in the Japanese league for 7 or 8 years. Then you can go to the major league. So they protect the homogenous nature of Japanese baseball in its league, making it a high-level league, and not bowing down to Major League Baseball, saying you can just have all our players out of high school, out of college, therefore watering our league down, making it second tier.
Yeah.
And if people of African descent learn to do that, again, all the economics will flow your way. If you look at the, or another example I'll point out is if you look at the University of Miami and the U, well, Howard Schnellenberger started that in 1980. The reason he did it because in 1979, Miami lost to FAMU in football. So just think if historically black colleges use the same model, the SWAC would be the SEC right now, getting millions of dollars. The schools would be, getting brand new infrastructure built because that's where the television money would be because the best athletes are there. But when television came in, thinking, white ice is colder and going to the other side, those same athletes made the predominantly white institutions millions of dollars, and now they have the lavish stadiums.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. That Howard Schellenberger point of just recruit the state of Miami is very famous and whatnot. And I would love to see African teams kind of impose that same rule about Japanese and be like, hey, look, if I think African clubs know where they are in the pecking order of things. I think they recognize like, hey, look, we can't financially compete with even the second rated nations like Austria or Belgium or whatever, but we don't want to weaken our own core system. So play here for 2-3 years, and then you can make the move up the year where things kind of get
Yeah.
balanced. It would be a great Really, I would love to see that happen, man, because I know I'm starting slowly to get more and more into African football, looking at it, and the power countries are all up north, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt.
And in the West, if you
Yeah,
look at the amount of athletes in, let's say, Serie A, the Premier League,
hmm
La Liga, uh, and the one in Denmark, from Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, like a lot of them countries, people come just for goalkeepers, 6'10", 7 foot. Like, if you really look into that, the amount of athletes that are not only in, again, looking at their top league, but look at their pyramid with their club teams, all the way down, and you'd be surprised at what you see.
yeah, most definitely, man. Um, Dude, this has been an amazing conversation. I hope our listeners loved it as much as I did. I
I hope so too,
thoroughly
man.
enjoyed it, man. Before we wrap up, my guy, do you have any last points you want to get across to the listeners about the what we talked about on today's show?
Definitely. So basically, my final synopsis will be, soccer is a beautiful game. As people of the African diaspora, we invented this modern game, so we should take pride in it. Watch it. The style of play that is played at its purest level is a byproduct of us as well, and just spread this information through our communities. We shouldn't be pigeonholed just in certain sports, and particularly when you have a historical tie to this sport. Not only in your home continent, but traveling different continents, finally make his way to the United States, again, through the diaspora. So let's get involved with that. United States Soccer, Nats Rebellion, the one and only true supporters club of individuals only of African descent. Please join Nats Rebellion and get a better presence on the national team side. Is also support your local team, whether that's USL or MLS. Just get out and let's grow this game of soccer in our communities.
Yeah, most definitely, man. Where can everyone reach you out at? And also, where can they get in contact with you if they want to read these articles we talked about today?
Okay, so if you want to get any information on soccer, I can be reached at pghjamar@gmail.com, on Facebook under the name Jamar Harp, and Twitter under Coach_Harp412Q. Again, that's Coach_HARP412QUE. Any information about soccer or just studying sport in general on a terminal degree level. We need more individuals like us, not only playing, but in the front office as administration, head coaches, owners, general managers, marketing professionals, videographers. There's so many jobs behind the scenes in sports. There's a lot of opportunities in the industry outside of the playing field.
Yeah. Well, man, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day for hopping on the show, man. It's been an absolute pleasure and a gem to talk to you about this because this is an issue that kind of gets brushed up underneath that we got to bring light to it, man.
Definitely, thank you so much, and I'd love to come back on anytime.
Yeah, most definitely, man. As always, listeners, we just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day for listening to our show because without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. So you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at Can I Kick It FC. We will holler at you guys next week. Be easy and be safe.